Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged podcast. Half of it coming from Australia, the Queensland coast, which you can see behind me. I just thought I'd record this introduction here because it's a bit unusual. It's not where I normally am. I'm having a small holiday break at the moment with my wife and daughter and her boyfriend, and it's very nice. I'm not complaining. It is currently 32 degrees centigrade in Australia on the beach. Altogether not bad. I recorded this podcast very recently with Dan Caesar, who is CEO of the Fully Charged show, and we discussed numerous topics, most of which we recorded, particularly about the changes in the automotive industry, which I think are rapidly gaining momentum and are pretty globally important, and we're seeing huge changes in the automotive space and also in the energy space in general, but specifically at the moment in the automotive space. So that is why we thought it's time to record this podcast. Dan, really good to talk to you. It's good to catch up. We've got lots to catch up on. Normally when we talk like this, I'm maybe 100 miles away in the UK, and obviously I'm a little bit further now. Down in the old Antipodes.
Well, we feel really, really jealous. We feel really jealous because you've got the sunshine. You took it with you. But I was at the Science Museum yesterday, which remember, is where we first met.
It is, yes, at the Science Museum.
I don't expect you to remember that exact time, but that's
I don't remember the exact time. I remember being there. Yeah.
That's when we started. I volunteered to come and help you.
Yes.
Good or
and I thought this man is insane, hasn't he? What's he doing? But my goodness, I'm grateful you did. No, that's weird. Oh, great. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Oh, right. And is it good? I mean, you weren't there to see a specific installation. It was a general visit.
Just there trying. It's been raining here a lot, so we were just trying to keep the kids from tearing.
No, it's amazing. I love going there anytime.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was good. They really enjoyed it. So but the memories came flooding back of when I invaded your life, and so you need me. You need my help.
But that I also read your blog, so I just want to mention that because if people don't know about it, but on the fullycharged.show website, there is Dan wrote a really interesting blog about I'd like a topic I certainly think is worth discussing today about the shifts in the automotive industry and how that is changing so dramatically. And I mean, just quickly, Dan, I just want to make the observation that since I've been in Australia, it's not some. I mean, the shift towards electric cars very, very noticeable. A lot of people. It's a very hot topic of conversation. Tesla have absolutely wiped the floor with, in particular, Toyota. I think these are two companies we're going to be talking about a lot today. The Tesla Model 3 now outsells I can't remember the make of the car, but whatever Toyota make, which was of a similar size. The Model 3 sells more than Toyota now. It is the number one selling car in Australia. It's Model 3 and Model Y. And you really see it. It's very noticeable out in the streets. There are hundreds of them around. It's really a common sight. That was not the case when I was here last time. Really, really big change. But the other thing I noticed is I'll be sitting on a motorway, freeway thing behind a huge SUV, petrol SUV, and I look at the back and it says GWM, Great Wall Motors, Chinese. There are thousands of Chinese cars on the roads in Australia of different makes, many of which you and I have never seen or heard of. It's a really noticeable. And many of these are still petrol and diesel big pickup trucks, which are very popular here. But clearly they've got the marketing infrastructure already here. You go past the big car showrooms and it's Nissan, Renault, Toyota, Ford, and then you go, oh, Great Wall. Oh my goodness. We would never see that in Europe or the UK, or we haven't, but I'm sure we will.
Well, it's really good to get out of your bubble. And I think this has been the problem in the automotive industry and the wider world is that we all live in bubbles and silos, and we weren't as acutely aware of that until social media for good or for ill came along. But I'm
Yeah.
really trying hard now to read outside of my comfort zone, to watch things outside of my comfort zone, to get
Yeah.
out of my bubble, whether it's travel or whatever it is, because we all occupy this world, and living in the fully charged universe is particularly strange because we see a lot and we have this incredible
Yeah.
vantage point, which I think my blog was trying to say. We have access to the older OEMs, the older automakers around the world. We have access to the
Yeah.
new ones as well. We can see what's coming. We talk to those companies. We can see where they haven't got cars, or whether they're a bit slow-footed, or if they're really ambitious. We see all that behind the scenes, and we
Yeah.
inhabit that echo chamber and that bubble. At the same time, what's happened, I think, to the car makers, and I'd like to go around quite a few of the car makers today and talk about them in a bit more detail. But what I think has happened is quite a lot of them, the ones particularly you might associate with the sort of petrolheads. We always laugh, don't we, that
Yeah.
we're not petrolheads. We never really have been, you and I, and we end up running this huge business about electric cars. Is quite ironic.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of those sort of cars, I had an Audi years back, which I loved very, very much. But it was a kind of a petrolhead brand, and what a fantastic car.
Absolutely.
But when their core customer wasn't going into their dealership saying, I want an electric one of these, that was their bubble.
Yeah.
And I think that they assumed that there would be less demand than there has been. But evidently now we live in a world where a different type of consumer, a more techie consumer, has come along, and they've hoovered up Teslas and other electric brands, and suddenly some of the older guard find themselves, I think, a few years out of step. And it's fascinating to watch, and hence the blog, which I recently published on the website, because it's very much about the invasion of Asian car companies, not just China, but Korea as well.
No.
And we know someone in Vietnam that one of the Japanese companies is pretty progressive. So I think it's just an extraordinary moment, and I would urge anyone in kind of old automotive to take a step outside of that bubble and look into ours for a while, and be aware that actually there is a very, very big threat coming.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it is. Just to see my sister-in-law has a BYD Atto 3, and I think there are two of these in Brisbane. There's probably a few hundred in the country, but Brisbane is we think we've seen another one, one other one. But I mean, it is a really good little car. It is fantastic. And I know Elliot reviewed it some time ago in China, but that's the first one I've seen in the flesh. And she absolutely loves it. And I took her to use a rapid charger for the first time. And that's been an experience in Australia for me, is that because I've been driving a Nissan Leaf for the last few weeks. And when you go to a rapid charger in Australia, I've had all sorts of issues with the apps and with my phone being British and all that that's all been a nightmare. But when you have got an Australian phone with the app on, you drive up to the charger, you plug it in, and it works. It always works. And that is, I think there's not enough people to wear them down yet, but they're all, it's incredibly reliable, much, much smaller network than we've got in the UK. But that said, when you do go to them, they work. And the one near her, maybe I shouldn't say, because everybody will go there who's got an electric car in Brisbane, but it's free. You just plug it in, it's at the university. You just plug your car in and a rapid charger, and it charges it. Like the old days in England.
I mean, I think that if we start with China, because they are going to hoover up a quite considerable share of the car market globally, they have been totally underestimated. And the reality is, obviously, there's the hardware and the software element to electric cars, which is vastly different to what the older legacy automakers have had to make before. And so I think the assumption was that the Chinese car companies wouldn't make high quality products. But having seen the funky Aura Cats, having seen the Peng P7, having seen other cars like that, I can testify, and I know you feel the same way, that the quality, the build quality, really interior quality is absolutely fantastic. And the stealth brands, let's not forget MG. The new MG4 is fantastic inside and out. Polestar too, similarly. So that from that side of things, they have been underestimated. And then from the software side of things, I have to be careful what I say, but I can say that if you remember when XPeng first started to develop their X Pilot, there were rumors and, in fact, I think some litigation from Tesla that one of their people had left Tesla and gone to XPeng and taken some code with them. I mean, that was eventually thrown out of court, I believe. But the software within the Chinese cars is exceptional.
It's
so when it comes
amazing.
to charging or even things like vehicle to load, they have started almost with a blank slate, and they are reaping the rewards. I mean, certainly at the moment you're in Australia ahead of Fully Charged Live Australia in Sydney on March 11th and 12th, and we're working out which car companies are going to be there in their own right, which ones are going to be part of our electric alley, which is where we display as many of the cars as we can, and which ones are going to be part of our electric launch pad, which is where we display new ones that are coming along. And certainly it looks at the moment that the manufacturers that are going to be there all make their cars in Asia.
Wow. Okay. Right. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
And they have access to cars, most importantly. I know it's quite difficult to put your name down to a live show if you've not got any cars to sell. But
yes,
the reality is that we are looking at brands that probably haven't been seen, haven't displayed before in Australia, and they will be down under. And we're having a similar experience in the UK. So we were getting told quite consistently by the Chinese car companies that they probably wouldn't be looking to get into the UK until 2024. 2025, obviously, the right-hand drive thing and being on the end of the continent means we're kind of waiting for cars in the UK. But Biden's IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act that came in last autumn, actually mandated that more cars have got to be, if they're going to be sold in America, they've got to be made in America, and the materials have got to come from America, or a proportion of them. And that seems to have changed things. So when we're talking to people about Fully Charged Live UK now, north and south, suddenly a huge influx of brands from
Chinese
Malaysia
brands,
and China. Some I can't. I don't know when this is going to go out. This podcast relatively soon, but some I can't talk about. But very, very exciting. Like world exclusive for us. And this was always inevitable. I felt, and if you're not making, cheaper cars and sort of mid-range cars, what's going to happen? Someone is going to spy an opportunity. Someone's going to deliver. Nature abhors a vacuum, and we've always said that at some point someone will step forward, and this looks like the year that's going to start to happen. Which I think is just absolutely fascinating. And I wonder if people within their OEM legacy automaker bubbles really realize what's about to happen, or maybe they're just powerless to prevent it. Maybe there's nothing they can do, and they just have to.
I would think it is so much because when we've talked about this before, and I've certainly talked about it to loads of engineers and people in the automotive industry, how hard it is to launch a startup car company. Very obviously, it's an enormous difficulty, and we know of. Someone actually put on Twitter the other day the list of brands that you and I will have heard have been launched in the last 12 years, say. And I'd forgotten them. None of them have made it, not one. But I remember hearing about them, or watching the launches, or going to the launch, or meeting the people who are doing them, and they just haven't managed to get out of the gate. And we can think of, like, on the fingers of one hand, the companies that have started. But what is interesting is, once they get a foothold, but obviously the Chinese ones have got so much more money and engineering experience behind them. But once they do, they grow so fast and they take over so quickly. I mean, BYD made phone batteries 10 years ago. They didn't make cars, maybe 15 years ago, give them a break. But, that's what they made. So when you had a flip phone in the 1990s, that was the battery, and it was made by BYD. Well, now they're making really good cars. That Atto 3 is a very, very high end. And they've made 750,000 of them. I see it as a new car they've just launched. No, there's 750,000 Atto 3s on the road in China. They're very finessed.
I think that assumption that Tesla was the only breakthrough brand and there wouldn't be any others, I understand where that assumption came from, but I'm going to stick my reputation and by association yours on the line. So I think that's over now. I think there are new brands that are going to come
without
through.
question. Yeah,
and obviously the Chinese are the most obvious. So BYD were recently touted as the biggest electric vehicle maker in the world. Not true on my standpoint, because actually that includes plug-in hybrids, electric vehicles, which I just don't count as electric. It's still fueled. But they won just shy of 1 million cars made in 2022. Tesla, meanwhile, made 1.3 million, probably on track for 1.8, 1.9 million this year. Then you've got the likes of the NIO, Xpeng. You mentioned Great Wall Motors earlier. The likes of Geely, who obviously own lots of different brands, the world. The likes of SAIC Motors, SAIC Motors, who own MG, and so on and so forth. So the time has changed. These brands are coming through. And then what's interesting, of course, is the others that have come almost from nowhere. So we've started covering VinFast from Vietnam, whose ambition is global domination, and no less than that. And they're a huge business in their own right, and they've actually been able to produce some pretty good cars, and they are really being sort of aggressive in terms of trying to get into the US market right now. And then if you go around the world, there are lots and lots of other brands. Like there's some quite interesting ones in Europe, for example. There's the Sono Motors Sion, which we've covered many times. There is Lightyear, the Dutch solar car company, who've just announced their Lightyear 2, which is their lower cost second model, which I'm pretty excited about. There's another company coming out of Germany called E.Go, E.Go. And there are others in Europe coming through. And I think some of them have a really, really good chance. I mean, I know that Sono's struggles have been kind of, fairly public, not least because the way that modern companies try and, use their struggles as a way to sort of get more money into the business. But for us, I think it's absolutely right that Fully Charged should be covering those companies. Don't we want cars that have solar? Have the ability to add to their range with solar? Don't we want them to succeed? I think we do. So we've never been a business that said, I don't think I've ever heard you say, Robert, oh, you need to invest in this car company. It's just not something that you do. It's not something that I do. We don't invest. In fact, we feel much more able to speak freely because we don't invest. I mean, certainly what I noticed recently is that there may have been a slight deterioration in the share value of Tesla, for example, for reasons I can only speculate. Multiple reasons, I'm sure, but certainly Elon Musk's kind of ownership of Twitter and his initial kind of comments didn't help, I would say. But then I noticed lots of Tesla shareholders saying, oh, no, it's all fine. No, Tesla's amazing. The fundamentals are extraordinary, all the rest of it. And you're thinking, well, the fundamentals for Tesla are extraordinary, but you are an investor. And if you just lost 70% value of your £1 million of stock or whatever you have, and it's gone down to $300,000, you'd quite like to get it back up again. And therefore, can I really believe you? So I think from my point of view, we don't invest as an organization, and we don't tell people to invest. But businesses like Lightyear, Sono are fascinating. I hope they succeed, but I'm sure that they will help popularize technologies like solar on cars. Like we need vehicle to load and vehicle to grid and those things to do well as well. So, and then in the USA and Canada, which is another market we look at heavily because we've got a very sizable audience over there. About a third of our audience is over there. It's really interesting to see what's happening there as well, because you've got Ford, who, in my opinion, get it and are really trying to change the way they're operating with the E-Transit, with the Ford Lightning, with the Mustang Mach-E, and are doing a pretty good job. And then you've got the flip side, which is GM, who I think is struggling so far.
But they did make the Hummer. Come on.
They did make the Hummer, and they've got the Ultium battery and great, but there's not a lot of, we'll see. I mean, I hope they succeed, but it certainly looks like they've been a bit slower to get to the market. And then, of course, Tesla we give that plenty of airtime. So I'd like to sort of do a shout out for some of the other US brands, really. Most interesting for me are things like the Rivian. Fisker is quite interesting.
Because I mean, Fisker are one of those ones where I have definitely they've gone onto my it'll never happen list, which is quite long. And actually, they keep hopping back to might actually happen.
It's interesting, isn't it? I totally see that. I mean, I think for me, we saw Fisker in San Diego. We saw the ocean. And I
Really
have to
nice car.
say,
Yeah.
what a good-looking vehicle that is.
Yeah.
As soon as they said, though, they were going to make the car at Magna in Austria,
Yeah.
which is where JLR have been making the I-Pace, I thought, actually, if you see yourself as the designers, the inspiration, the money behind
Yeah.
this, but actually you're going to outsource the manufacturer to someone else, then I kind of changed my opinion slightly. I'm
Yeah.
actually relatively confident that they're going to make it. Although that like the genesis of that business has been going on for a
Long
long,
time. Yeah.
long time. And
Yeah.
then Rivian, similarly, I think they had Saudi money initially, probably again like a decade ago. So that's been going a long, long time. But from my understanding, they are at a run rate now in terms of delivering cars that is
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fairly impressive. And again, if you've seen the R1T and the R1S, you'll know they're just
Beautiful.
extraordinary
Yeah.
vehicles. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I've driven I've driven the which one have I driven? I've
R1T, have
driven
you?
the R1T, the truck,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I don't think you've driven, have you? I hate to mention
No, I
it.
haven't. I've
Oh, yeah,
sat in
so
it, but I
I,
haven't driven it. Yeah.
so I've, and it was just extraordinary. And I think that they started manufacturing. They were unfortunate. The pandemic hit when they were not fully mature.
Yeah.
Tesla was already kind of, good to go. They were making lots of cars. They were, opening Shanghai, all the rest
Yeah.
of it. They were kind of quite well hedged globally. So they were less vulnerable. They'd already sort of vertically integrated. They've always got their costs down. They've got access to the supply chain, all the raw materials, etc. Rivian were kind of partway through that process. So I think they got hit pretty hard by the
Yeah.
pandemic and its timing. But they're making some really, really good progress. So we're working to get Rivian to all of our live shows from the UK onwards this year. And then there's others which just fascinate me, which I do have a big question mark over, which is for me, Lucid Motors is the one
Yeah.
I'm not sure about. That again, that's been around for a
Yeah.
while. As that's Peter
Long time.
Rawlinson's vehicle
Yeah.
who came out of Tesla.
I mean,
And
amazing team behind it. Really, really
yeah,
impressive team
and
that
an
put that together.
absolutely extraordinary car from all accounts,
Yeah.
in terms of its spec and all the rest of it, but quite high end. And you just wonder
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
if that part of the market, early EV adopters with lots of money to spend, hasn't been quite well filled by Tesla Model S and X already.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd have to check, but I saw some numbers last week which indicated that Lucid are kind of making cars, making the same amount of cars in a year that Tesla are making in a day.
Right.
So
God. Yeah.
that's I would say
Yeah.
slightly worrying sign. There was a huge order that came from Saudi for lots of Lucids, but Saudi are
Right.
embedded in the investment side of Lucid, so you don't quite know what's going
Yeah.
on there. It's a
Yeah.
little bit opaque. And frankly, we've been trying to get a Lucid on the channel, on Fully Charged Show, for about a year or so,
For
and
years.
they
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
not come back to us, which I would
Right.
say,
Okay.
which is
Yeah. Not a good sign. Yeah.
is not a great sign. So there are lots and lots of these companies, and it's like it's the beginning of a new race in a way. I think 2023, 2024 is almost like the starting guns going off. Who's in position?
Yeah.
And some of
Yeah.
these new companies are in, Tesla, the Chinese. I think Rivian. I'd like to think
Yeah.
Lightyear and some others will be in a strong position. And it's not to say there won't be some more entrants. I saw Sony and Honda's kind of
Yeah.
vehicle at CES.
Well,
I'm very skeptical about that personally, but there might be
yeah.
there might just be about time for some more runners and riders to enter this race as well.
But it makes such sense. That was the thing that caught my eye. You went, well, Sony, incredible experience in electronics, in software, in battery management, in all that microelectronics. I mean, they're for decades and decades, way ahead of very often. We use Sony cameras all the time. That's what the camera crew like using. And Honda have made some fantastic cars. Actually, it's arguable the very first proper hybrid was a Honda. It was not the Prius. It was the Honda. They got there first. But then you see what they've made, because when I saw the headline, I immediately envisaged like the Honda E, really cool car that's got a 200-mile range, and it's small and it's compact and it's cool and it looks really nice. And then it was like, oh no, it's a kind of luxury executive brand with gaming facilities. I mean, it's fine. I'm sure people want to play computer games, but you can do that anyway. Why, it's just,
Yeah.
make a car that we can drive
The
from A to B in the dryer. That's,
Venn diagram for executives and gamers is
yeah.
probably not got much of
No,
an
not a huge amount of
I
crossover.
wouldn't say,
No.
but no, and that's you're right. It is just extraordinary to watch what's happening. So we've talked about the Chinese ad infinitum. So I guess it's a good time to talk about the others. But the Koreans, who we deal with a lot,
Yeah.
Hyundai and Kia and
Kia.
Genesis,
Yeah.
are very, very modern and progressive in their approach. You could tell by the styling of the vehicles, can't you? They're
Yeah.
quite out there. The Ioniq 5 and the EV6, and they're
Yeah.
great,
Brilliant.
great vehicles. But Korea, obviously, they're younger companies.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they're younger companies, and that Japanese era of domination with electronics and car making is now decades old. And that's the reality. I was watching
Yes. Yeah. You're
Tokyo
right.
Vice recently on the BBC. I think it's an HBO series which goes back to the sort of 1990s Tokyo and the Yakuza and all the rest of
Right.
it. And and that's an era I know well. It's the era of tape cassettes and all those kind of high-end electronics, those great looking cars. But that is now, I'm sad to say, I'm aging myself, I'm aging you. That is 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Technology
history.
is getting faster and faster. And it seems to me that Japan finds itself in a extremely invidious position as regards the next wave of technology. And when it comes to gone.
I was only going to say it was an interesting take. It was something Imogen said, one of our fabulous presenters and researchers, but about the Japanese market. So internally, the Japanese market, about their anxiety is all about producing enough electricity. When I first read it, it made sense. The more I thought about it, it doesn't really make that much sense. That's why they're pushing hydrogen, and they want to produce hydrogen. They want to produce green hydrogen, sort of, but they're really going to be just importing hydrogen from somewhere else that's made from natural gas.
They had obviously,
but because they don't have those natural resources. But I mean, they're an island like us. There's going to be wind at sea. They can do offshore wind. I mean, it is much deeper. They don't have a continental shelf like we do.
Yeah, that's right.
So
I think. I mean, culturally, books will be written about it. Kaizen, just-in-time delivery, all the things that Japan is known for, gave it, decades of huge industrial success. But now, almost they're kind of, painted into a corner, unable to turn the tanker quickly. I can crucify any number of metaphors on this, but the reality is that they've got themselves in a difficult situation, that they've really backed hybrid technology. But the Prius is 26 years old now. But I just like to say that they've obviously got a huge amount of sunk cost in creating hybrids in the factories and the people, and obviously then to switch to electric would be a big deal. And so they've tried to hedge on these kind of self-charging hybrid things, and you don't need to plug in. Actually, if everyone had hybrids, would be a bigger environmental gain than if a few people had electric vehicles, the rest of it. So it's a real shame to see that. But as you say, I think they have huge LNG imports there. They obviously had the aftermath of Fukushima and what that meant in terms of energy policy to deal with. So I have some sympathy, as I understand it. I think solar is quite. Potential is quite strong in Japan, but yes, it's the depth of the water off Japan that means that it would have to probably be a lot of floing wind.
Which is a lot more challenging to do.
A lot more challenging, and then you realise how lucky we are in the UK, in one respect at least, in terms of we actually are fairly easily able to deploy lots of offshore wind. But Japan could have onshore wind as well.
They do have some, because we know that Britwind in Stroud, that produces small scale wind turbines, it's about 90% of their sales are to farmers in Japan. It's really fascinating.
Oh, okay.
So we're exporting huge numbers of small windmills to Japan, which is
I didn't know that. So I mean, Japan is in this really interesting situation. But if you take Honda, for example, I mean, the Honda E, pound for pound, cutest looking electric vehicle out there. I would say interior,
stunning,
incredible, but hamstrung by a very, very short range. And
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
it kind of screams compliance, doesn't it? It screams, oh, we need to be in
Yeah.
this, so we'll do it, but we don't actually really want to sell that many. I don't know if you picked
Yeah.
up on the news from Mazda in the last week or so, but the MX-30, there's a newer version, I think it's the US
Right.
market, that's going to have an even smaller battery. I think the current range of the EV is about 130 miles, but is actually going to have a rotary engine range extender.
Extender.
I don't know the ins and outs, but actually, it seems like a real kind of backward step, and therefore you fear for Mazda in the new world. And then of course there's our old friends Toyota, who do seem to be stuck in a situation where they are struggling to say publicly, they're trying to almost like pour cold water off and on the pure electrification of vehicles.
Very much so. Yeah, they've been very negative statements.
Very confusing campaigns, some very negative statements. And above all, I know I might not be popular in the corridors of Toyota. It's a crying shame because
brilliant
in 10, 15 years, where will it leave the company? I would say there will be significantly smaller. Time will tell, but at the moment it seems like I don't know. I think someone said to me, and I don't know really. I did some consultancy for an agency who got in touch with me on behalf of Toyota a couple of years ago to take my kind of view as an outside person. And they were saying to me, the agency actually, obviously, the Japanese culture is very, very different. It's a bit more regimented. And that actually, if they have made an error, it might be more difficult internally to course correct because people have got to acknowledge that there has been an error in the first place. And obviously, the Japanese way of doing business does not make that easy. But all my money would be on pure electric cars now, and not on hybrids and not on hydrogen technology. Either. And one last thing, Robert, on Asian cars is that I saw that BYD I think they're pioneering sodium-ion batteries. I don't know if it's for the Seal or for the Dolphin.
Right.
But they've also, the BYD have got their Blade batteries as well. I think Toyota, to segue it back, Toyota are using some of those Blade batteries.
Yes, they are. Yes.
Yeah. So, electric. And that's advancement, right? Once you've got that early mover advantage, unless you do something really, really silly with it, you're kind of in control. And that's where I fear for the Japanese brands.
I've just been reading the Zero Emission Vehicles Fact Book from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which just came out a couple of days ago. But one of the things that caught my eye straight away, right in there for sort of early synopsis, is because I've assumed that things like manufacturing batteries has been like static because of COVID, because of the global supply chain shortage, blah, 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 that we might see a ramp up of manufacturing in the next couple of years because we're kind of getting back online and things are starting to get so wrong. Global lithium ion battery manufacturing capacity has increased 38% in the last year. So it's gone up enormously. We produced 540 gigawatt hours in 2021. Who knew? That's a huge amount. And 806 gigawatt hours last year. And they're expecting to go over 1,000 gigawatt hours this year. So that is increasing enormously. And that means that there is more supply. And I mean, that is the kind of sense I'm getting now, particularly with Tesla and what Tesla are doing. They are selling so many cars. So the kind of what I think is changed for me since I've been here is it was so focused on a certain billionaire. The company was. There's tens of thousands of people who work in that company that never get any press quotes, that never tweet, that don't say anything, that aren't friends with some fairly dodgy and unpleasant people, who are making the cars, and they are producing tens of thousands of cars, which are really popular, which sell all over the world. And they are producing the batteries that go into those cars. I mean, we're talking, if you're making 10,000 cars a week, that's gigawatt hours of batteries that are in those. When you're doing over 1 million a year, it's a huge amount of materials processing. And one last thing in relation to that is there's just been news literally today in Australia that there are 2 projects, one much further ahead, to build battery gigafactories in Australia to make use of the materials that are in Australia. So you don't have to ship them out of Australia, have them refined, bring them back in, which is what they do now with everything in Australia. You just dig it up here, you send it overseas, someone refines it and then sells it back to you for much more money. That's how they, And so, and everyone I've spoken to here that's in electric vehicles or interested in that or in government is talking about manufacturing here, because when I first came here, you would buy a Holden or a Ford or a Toyota. Those are the three brands, maybe Volkswagens and maybe Land Rovers, but it was very small. But the vast majority of cars, Holden and Ford, made in Australia. Both those companies have pulled out of Australia. There is no car manufacturing here at all. But I reckon we're going to see some in the near future.
There's going to be some huge opportunity for countries like Australia. I mean, we're doing an episode soon on Australian abundance and how it's got access to materials and how it can reinvent itself as a clean energy superpower. And it won't be the only country that can lay claim to that. Obviously China is another, Indonesia. There's lots of countries that will benefit from this. And when I'm occasionally, sparring with shills for the fossil fuel industry on LinkedIn, for example, I've left Twitter pretty much. I'm doing it on LinkedIn more nowadays.
Me too. I try to.
When I'm over there doing that, what is quite interesting is this kind of blind assumption that there just aren't enough materials. And actually, the challenge is matching supply and demand, getting stuff to the market at the right speed to match demand. That will be a
hugely problematic.
It's not that there's not enough. I mean, there was a huge discovery of rare earth materials, deposits of rare earth materials in Sweden last week. I don't know if you saw that in the news.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
And, they're not really that rare, these rare earths anyway. It's a kind of a bit of a misnomer. Yeah. But the reality is we're at the beginning of another space race. When we went from, burning wood to burning coal, they had to build the mines, they had to get the coal out of the ground, and all that sort of thing. When we had to get the vaccine, there was an incredible amount of urgency behind that. Similarly with the space race, and now with this, people will find, now that they know that the consumer demand is there for electric vehicles, that will happen. So Australia stands to gain massively. And as you say, Tesla has got itself in automotive terms, although I don't think they consume as many of these materials as some other businesses around the world, but in automotive terms, they're at the front of the queue, aren't they? Whereas, I don't know, someone like a Toyota might find itself right at the back of the said same queue, and that will cause them a lot of problems. So, I mean, what's going on with Tesla is it's an incredible story that has many years to run. They and the Chinese companies will pick up a huge percentage of the kind of electric car market over the next 5, 10, 15 years. But what was interesting is, of course, they did some price dropping.
That is extraordinary. Recently. I mean, that is because when you hear a car company is doing a price drop, you would think, oh, they've reduced the price by $250 or $500. Not $8,000. I mean, it's like, how can they do that? How can they? Are they now deciding to do an Amazon and just undercut everyone else and lose money for 10 years, or are they still making a profit? I mean, I don't know how their business works.
Some of their detractors were arguing that there was a demand softening, and I'm not saying that that's not true. I have no idea, so I can't say whether that's true or not true. It may well be the case, but the detractors shouldn't get too excited by the news that there's a demand softening. Tesla's goal is to get those cars made, right? They're being made. Let's get them sold, right? So they are manipulating the market in a way that they can, because they have higher profit margins per car than anyone else out there. Some are still struggling to make profit on electric cars, so they could do that. And the worrying thing is they could do it again if they choose. So I would be extremely concerned, because if you are trying to sell a competitor to the Model 3, for example, or the competitor to the Model Y now, it's gotten harder. So again, it's that first mover advantage. So forgetting the kind of the figurehead at Tesla still has a huge say on what's going to happen in this marketplace. As I say, 1.8 million cars expected out of the different factories around the world in the next 12 months. Where could they grow to? I think they've stated they want to get to 20 million over time by 2030, something like that. I mean, maybe. I mean,
it's now increasingly plausible, isn't it? It's not. It's not less likely. It's much more likely.
You add that to the number of cars that the Chinese are able to make and to deliver. Could they, between them, Tesla times China, could it be producing 30 million cars a year? And by the way, that's the best part of half of the market globally. And the point I was
Right.
trying to make in the blog is, where's that share going to come from? Well, it's going to come from those who are at the back of the queue, those who aren't
Right.
coming forward with vehicles. So it's an extraordinary time to be in the market, whether you're a car guy or not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. It is fascinating, and I mean, it has been a kind of, a slight step back in time for me coming here again. 'Cause I haven't been here for nearly 5 years, and it is like it's like the UK was 5 years ago, or even more. Maybe 6 or 7 years ago. That it is. There's amazing evangelism amongst the electric car users here. They're very, very. They are. It is the early adopters that have got them. Whereas even in the UK, even now, just some people just buy an electric car because they don't want a petrol one, or because they like the look
That
of it. Not
that
they're not
extraordinary
being.
energy, that extraordinary early market energy is dissipated in the UK. The
Yeah.
idea of Tesla drivers waving to each other
Yes. That
has
does.
gone.
No
In
one
fact, I
waves.
tried it the other
Yeah.
day, and people think you're a lunatic if you try that. But equally,
Yeah.
there were loads
No.
of
Very true.
EV clubs in the UK. Because it was a
Yeah.
great place for first time EV owners to meet up. I'm not saying they don't exist anymore, but the
Yeah.
energy is definitely dissipated. So it's interesting to see Australia is in that kind of early market stage. The interest
Yeah.
we've had in the Sydney show has been huge. You can
Oh,
tell it's
good.
been a
Oh,
market that's
good.
been
Yeah.
probably starved of attention, starved
Yeah.
of cars, and all the other things that we're going to bring to Sydney in March. So that's been really interesting. But again, on LinkedIn, I have discussions with people, often British people. I'm not saying that they voted for Brexit, Robert. I wouldn't say that, but they're basically arguing that that the car thing in the UK, the electric car thing, is just a fluke. It's just because of subsidy.
Yeah.
It's because it's favouring company car drivers, the rest of it. And you literally, I want to crawl out of the monitor into their room and open their eyes and say,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is not there's no borders here. This is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
about Britain. This is a global
Absolutely.
megatrend.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing I can do about it. Even the
Yeah.
channel
Yeah.
has a huge audience, right? We play a small role in what is a
Tiny
huge
role. Yeah. Yeah.
tsunami of demand now. And it's the network
Yeah.
effect. Every time someone gets an EV, they go, oh, this is really good.
Yeah.
Because they
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
good and they are better, and they inspire someone else in their street. You can
Yeah.
see that really, really clearly. Now I know that my other half, who works on the Fully Charged show as well, she kind of runs the events around the world. I had an EV, and she drove it as well. I got my first one in 2015, I think. I had a BMW
Right.
i3, and I bought it, and I went back to her and I said, look, I've got a spreadsheet. I don't think it's going to cost us any more money, so I think I'm going to get this. And
Right.
she kind of did what I suspect your wife does, Robert, and she sort of raised her
Yeah.
eyebrow at me and sort of said, let him have his
Yeah.
his
Walked
weird,
away shaking her head. That's the thing. Yeah.
his weird hobbies. And then we had a Kona for a while, and then eventually fell into the kind of the cliche and got a Model 3. But when she'd been working for Fully Charged for a little while, after she went to one of our live shows, she went, "I'm going to get one." And she made the decision. I couldn't tell her, could I? I couldn't make her do
Yeah.
that. She went, "I want to do that." And she got a Nissan Leaf, an old Mark 1 2011 Nissan Leaf with the kind of
Yeah.
the one car that you can say actually the batteries are in a little bit dubious.
Yeah. The range isn't that good. The batteries are a bit dodgy. Yeah.
And recently she's ordered an MG4, and
Right. Yeah.
we are we're super excited about taking delivery of that. But who would know, unless you're in the industry? No one really thinks, oh, that's a Chinese brand. They just think, oh,
No.
that's a good car, and it's
a
pretty
car.
reasonably
Yeah.
priced. And
Yeah.
so it's really interesting, I think. And companies like MG and BYD and all those companies are kind of very much Australia's in their sights, isn't it? It's relatively
Yeah. Yeah.
it's closer to here. They're relatively
Yeah.
close. And actually, Elliot, who's our Chinese correspondent, is going to come down to meet you in Sydney
That's great.
to
That's so
present
good.
at
Yeah.
Fully Charged Live Australia. But it'll be the first time you've ever met him, right?
Yeah, no, we've never met. No, absolutely. It's so weird. I've been talking to him for years. It's so going to be so strange to see him. I don't know. If he suddenly turns out to be the same height as Jack, I'm going to get an awful shock.
I think he might be somewhere
He's
in between.
6'5". I think he probably is.
Yeah, somewhere
But
in
that
between.
was it. I mean, the other thing that I've seen here, and I'll be doing some more shows with it, but is the convert. So there's more chance of there being a kind of conversion industry in Australia than I thought. So there was already some amazing, little workshops that are doing fantastic conversion. I mean, it's a beautiful Volkswagen, microbus pickup truck. It's like a crew cab pickup truck, but on VW, what camper van front. I don't know how to describe it. One of those things. It's got a special name, but an electric conversion of that, so nicely done. So very much like we know people like Richard in and New Electric and all those people who are doing these fantastic conversions. But what we're talking about here is industrial scale conversion of, say, 5,000 pickup trucks that are owned by a big company that use fleet cars, and they can do a conversion in a day. So they've got a specially designed pack that you take out the engine and transmission and gearbox and exhaust and fuel tanks and all that, and you fit in this pack into that in a day, and you've got an electric pickup truck, which are really popular here, that has about a 250-mile range, can rapid charge, all that stuff, all the software built in, it fits in. That is, if that comes off, and that is not a kind of little startup, that is a startup with some serious money behind it, and really interesting people I'll be interviewing.
So one of the conversion companies that we're familiar with in the UK, actually quite close to our production office, is Zero EV. And there's a company in Australia called Jaunt, and they've come together to form Fel 10. Fel 10 is Welsh for lightning, as I understand it. And they're doing exactly that sort of thing. And we're working with them to curate and build an electric and eclectic zone that should be at Sydney.
Great.
As well. We see that conversion market as being really interesting. I don't know if you remember about this time last year, Jack came back from France. He'd been filming with Transition One, and they effectively, do a similar thing, but for sort of cheaper, smaller electric cars. I remember he came back from the film shoot saying actually that it's still quite early. I wonder if it'll get reviews. Maybe we should just put it on our second channel. And I said, no, I think our audience will be quite interested in this. And it was a huge, high performing episode because people are fascinated by it. But you mentioned VW, and one thing I think in our remaining time we haven't touched upon is Germany, because for me, what's interesting is the travails that Japan is going through are fairly well known, I think. And I should say also, Nissan are probably the outlier in Japan. They're actually still trying hard to electrify. Sea of self-charging, I think they're doing pretty.
They're doing really well.
But Germany, for me, is really, really fascinating. I've had BMW i3 was my first electric car. They've just effectively canned that and stopped making it.
I love that car. It's a fantastic car.
Fantastic car. If you can get a second-hand BMW i3, I'd strongly recommend it. Audi, fantastic cars. Fantastic cars. Porsche undergoing a renaissance, actually, ironically, with the Taycan, and soon to release the Macan. VW, I've owned several Golfs. I think you have.
Me too.
As well, fantastic company. ID Buzz is now out. Amazing. Mercedes, I don't think I've had much experience with Mercedes, but obviously another company with incredible heritage, incredible history. But where are these companies in regards to pure electrification? And the reality is, I think they've also got some problems ahead. I think we've seen some statistics which indicate when people are buying Tesla Model 3s and Polestar 2s, a lot of them coming out of BMW 3 Series, Audi A4s.
Yes.
Those types of cars.
Mercedes,
Mercedes. And it seems to me that Mercedes, BMW, and Audi all have the same strategy, which is to create premium SUVs.
Yeah.
And I would question how many buyers are there in those rarefied hills.
There can't be that many.
How many can there be at that premium level? Especially, I know the UK's got a more exacerbated cost of living crisis, but I'm pretty sure younger people are not getting richer, in most of these developed countries. So it seems to me they're almost inadvertently niching themselves into a kind of premium market space. And then I think by dint of the fact it's such a big organization, I think VW can we get a Skoda Enyaq to come to our live show? They won't come because they don't have enough of them available right now. VW similarly, I think they're struggling with supply chain issues. So it's sobering, really, and I think it's slightly worrying. Herbert Diess, of course, was the CEO of Volkswagen until relatively recently. Was very,
Yeah,
very pro EV, and he's now, of course, has succumbed and
yeah,
has gone. So, uh, don't get me wrong, I would like all these companies to succeed, but it seems to me
yeah,
like several into one will not go, and there are going to be some casualties in the next 4 or 5 years. It
yeah,
always sounds massively like I'm being over dramatic, a real drama queen,
yeah,
but I cannot see logically how some of them don't go, shrink significantly, or aren't bought by a Chinese company, for example, for a Chinese
yeah,
company to do what SAIC has done with MG or what Geely has done with
yeah.
Polestar. That
Yes,
it
that's,
seems
I
to
think,
me
very likely. Yeah, yeah,
unavoidable that some of those, there won't be a banquet of consequences coming, and it's not going to be pleasant for some of those organisations.
yeah. No, it is, and it is also the kind of the reminder I've had here as well, which is very specific to Australia, is the just the sheer quantity of one I mentioned already, enormous heavy vehicles, but two is sort of there are proud, loud petrol heads in Australia that, in a sense, I'm less aware of in the UK. I don't think we have quite the same. They've always existed. There's guys who run classic American muscle cars in the UK. In Essex, they're very popular. They do exist. But here they are so common that you'll be going along the freeway and you'll hear, and you'll see this thing come up with a huge, like Mad Max, massive supercharger sticking out the bonnet, and a dude with a mullet and a goatee beard and a lot of tattoos driving it, and they wave. They're very happy, But
And I
that's
think,
such a much more common sight. So I think there's a longer journey, because they're, in balance with that, you're surrounded by Teslas everywhere you go. Everywhere. They're just everywhere. And it's important to point out that, like Sydney, I know we haven't been there yet, but I know that everyone's saying, "Oh my God, every other car in Sydney is a Tesla." Same in Melbourne. Brisbane is kind of more a one-horse town with kind of pickup trucks and more like Texas.
yeah,
Queensland is a bit more like Texas, and there are so many thousands of Teslas in Queensland. It's unimaginable, but it does feel like there's a very strong, loud, articulate resistance to anything resembling an electric vehicle still in Australia, But I think so. It'll be fun. I think the live show is going to be fun. I
I
think it
saw
will be
a
a relief for the people who are interested in it. Yeah.
I saw one of those types of cars as I was driving into London over the race section through Hammersmith yesterday. It was kind of a customized Mercedes, and I thought, good
Right.
on them. It's not for
Yeah.
me, but that's absolutely
Yeah,
fine.
but it's fine.
I actually think you could get to the end of this, and you could see some sort of resurgence in those sorts of things as more of hobbyists,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
vinyl. Vinyl, for example, has come roaring back because people love it, right?
Hugely
So
popular.
I think the
Yeah.
car club
Yeah.
scene for those types of cars will actually potentially grow out of this in the long term. And I think that's where the anti-EV lobby have kind of got it wrong. It doesn't mean,
Yeah.
that these things are
You
gone
don't have any of that.
forever
No,
and a
of course not.
day. There'll still be some
Yeah.
classic motoring rallies. There'll still be these other things that exist,
Yeah.
racing, whatever. It's just about getting the mainstream off these kind of these cars that effectively pump out toxins. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
And I remember when we first met, and you kind of talked about when you got your first. I think was it an IMEV that you got
I mean,
first?
yeah. Yeah.
So
Mitsubishi, Japanese car. Yeah.
so in yeah, God, they were their first Japanese with the most
Yeah.
fuel
Yeah.
efficient cars.
Yeah.
Irony, but the reality is that I've often broken it down into those 5 layers. So from a marketing perspective, we sort of call them pioneers, early adopters,
Right.
early mainstream, late mainstream, and laggards. That's what we
Yeah.
call those 5 layers. And in the UK, we're very much into early mainstream.
Yeah. Yeah.
Territory. Australia still be in the kind of early adopter territory, and in
Yeah.
Norway, they're probably getting into almost might even be creeping into the late mainstream, and we're all
Yes.
somewhere
Absolutely.
along that journey, irrespective of borders.
Yeah.
This is a global mega trend that can't be resisted. But the 5 levels, I've kind of got new names for them, really. Which is the first one. The people like you got electric cars back in 12 years ago. I would describe you as
Yeah.
brave, extremely brave. The next group, which would include me, I got the i3 back in 2015, would be adventurous.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
slightly outside the norm. For me now, the people buying electric cars in the UK are normal. That's the
Yeah.
early mainstream.
Yeah.
And the late mainstream are just timid. They're just not quite as sure. They're just a bit slower. They'll get there.
Yeah.
And they might have some economic reasons, of course. Not everyone has a driveway. You can have an EV without a driveway, of course, but not everyone has a driveway. Maybe they don't have disposable income because EVs are too expensive still. I get that. Their prices are going to come down. They have to come down. But that last group, the laggard, fascinates me. I don't waste a second, apart from occasionally on LinkedIn, with those people because they will be the sort of person that when the ZEV mandates come in 2030, they will buy a diesel with 1 minute to midnight to their finger up and say, I'm going to run that for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So I don't waste time on those people. The classic car clubs, the tuned combustion engine cars, they will become an absolute object of fascination because the combustion engine is a kind of amazement. It's an incredible thing. It's complicated. It's extraordinary work of engineering, of course. That will become an object of fascination, but it will be a relic. And it will be looked at through a different lens.
As a historic
there's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. No. So it's exciting. But I would say from our perspective, we're working very, very hard to make sure you've got as many cars and bikes and all sorts of weird and wonderful electric vehicles in Sydney, and
Sydney.
also
it's going to be great.
Clean energy stuff, home energy advice team, and then the Farnborough show this year is going to be absolutely huge. That we're doing new things like a zero carbon kitchen, which is going to be
I'm looking forward to that.
Amazing. Harrogate and Farnborough both pretty much sold out. Extraordinary times, and so just for me, a big shout out to the production team who make everything so amazing on the channel, and a big shout out to the events team who do that and allow you and I just to occasionally just have a waffle like this.
It's good. That's good. That's a good roundup. I like that. No, that's fantastic.
I can actually delegate things now, which I find very strange. Like, we've got something.
I know. I just wander around all the time. I look at all the messages I get and I just feel guilty. And I go, no, you're all brilliant. You're all wonderful. It's amazing. There's so much going on now with the whole show that I cannot keep up with it. I don't blame myself anymore because there is so much happening. It's just impossible. My stage of life. I do my best to keep
we've just had to take on someone brand new to run the home energy advice team at all 6 shows.
Right.
And they're also running the electric alley, which is where we make sure we've got all the cars. If a car company says no, we then go to them and say, right, well,
we still get it. I love that.
And then electric launch pad. Well, there will be an electric launch pad at Sydney, but I think the one in Farnborough is going to be something else. I think we're going to have 20 to 30 cars there that no one's seen.
Wow.
Almost anywhere. And so,
I mean, I'm not going to mention names, but when I heard recently from the Australian team that such and such a car was coming up, and I've never done this before. I frantically Googled because I'd never heard of it, and that is coming to the show. So I'm not going to say who it is, but there is a car coming.
Very good.
It's very exciting.
It's very, very exciting for us. I think they're almost to make these cars available, even kind of slightly in spite some of the older companies who are struggling to get on board. And that was my only point from the blog I wrote, really. I want everyone to succeed, but there's just so many companies now, not everyone will be able to. And the longer you wait, the worse it's gonna get. And that is unfortunate. So I think as I signed off from that blog, you can watch it all from the safety of your sofa on the Fully Charged show. But it is going to be we're all going to be rubbernecking at what's going to happen in the next 5 years or so, I think.
Yeah. Brill, great talking to you, Dan. We've done under an hour, results.
Fantastic. I probably need to go to.
And as you can tell, I just realised I haven't even looked. It's gone dark here. I've only got one little light over there. I've got to go over there to get in the light. But it's great to talk to you, and we'll catch up soon. And
I won't be in Sydney, so I'm super jealous. But I know the team, handful coming down to run the event. I hope you have a great time.
No, good. I'm really genuinely, properly looking forward to it. That's all we've got time for this week's podcast. Really hope you enjoyed it. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show, tell your friends, all those things. Check out the Fully Charged website, fullycharged.show, because everything that we are planning and talking about and recording
is listed on there. It's a really good resource for all that. But as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.